Zooming in this morning to celebrate Alice Paul and our special guest, renowned Ridgefield artist, Tina Cobell Sturgis. And now, Tina, wave your hand. It says Amanda Cordano, but that's really Tina over there. So we'll see Tina in a little bit. But before we start our festivities, I'd like to thank our partner, Hildy, and the Keeler Tavern Museum and History Center for co-sponsoring and hosting this event. Keeler has done a truly extraordinary job during this pandemic of entertaining and educating with their numerous online programs and outdoor activities, and I hope you will all support their continued effort to do so during these difficult and challenging times. In addition to celebrating Alice's life this morning, we're really excited to draw the winning ticket for Tina's stunning seascape Morning Solitude, which she created especially for the League's Art Raffle fundraiser. Tina, who is on the board of the Ridgefield Guild of Artists, is the sixth artist from there that has donated a painting for our fundraiser. I'd also like to thank our League board member, Amanda Cordano. Amanda, raise your hand. There you are in the mask, because she's with Tina, actually, who has done such a fabulous job managing and promoting our fundraiser during this pandemic. Thanks to Amanda and, of course, Tina, this has been one of our most successful art raffle fundraisers to date. But before I introduce Tina to you, let's talk a little bit about our famous resident, Alice Paul. Well, let me share and show you a little bit about Alice for a moment. You know, before I wrote this presentation, it was before the horrific events of January 6th, when our Capitol was attacked and our elected officials were put in harm's way while trying to certify our votes. That is why I think it is especially important that we continue to recognize women like Alice Paul and all the other women who made our voting rights possible. Alice, who would have celebrated her 136th birthday on January 11th, was one of the most influential and consequential leaders in the women's movement and worked her entire life for equal rights for women. She was also a 30-year resident of Ridgefield, and as Ridgefields, we are very proud to be associated with her. But before I go into detail about Alice and her many accomplishments, I think it's important to give you a little background information about the origins of the women's movement and some of the women who influenced and impressed Alice or not. Let me tell you about the or not. There she is, Carrie Chapman Catt. Let's take a look at Carrie. Carrie was a founder of the League of Women Voters who would have celebrated her 164th birthday on January 9th. I suspect Carrie would be most displeased to hear that we're celebrating an Alice Paul Day, since Alice and Carrie were real suffrage rivals. This, of course, makes Alice's life even more interesting, since both women were so instrumental in achieving their mutual goal of getting the vote for women. But similar to so many political or social justice movements, including those of today, think of Nancy Pelosi and AOC. It takes all different types of people and approaches to succeed. Let's start at what many believe to be the women's movement beginning. Seneca Falls, 1848. It's the first women's rights convention in the United States, and they've written their Declaration of Sentiments, calling on women to fight for their constitutionally guaranteed right to equality as US citizens. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the conveners, and abolitionist and former slave Frederick Douglass was the influential supporter who helped get women's suffrage, including in that declaration. But was that really the start of the suffrage movement in the United States? Or did it begin with this lady right here in 1776, Abigail Adams, who demanded that her husband, John Adams, remember the ladies when writing the Declaration of Independence at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia? That was 72 years before Seneca Falls, and it took another 72 years after Seneca Falls for women to win the right to vote. It was a long, difficult, contentious, and controversial road to victory. The movement was interrupted by 2 wars and complicated by passage of the 14th Amendment, defining citizens and voters as males, and the 15th Amendment, enfranchising Black men and excluding women. So now let's go from 1848 to 1869. Folks who had worked together for years fighting for women's suffrage, many of whom were abolitionists, split into two groups over disagreements about support for and opposition to that 15th Amendment. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton opposed the amendment and formed the National Women's Suffrage Association, and Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe, who supported the 15th Amendment, formed the American Women's Suffrage Association. Having two separate acrimonious suffrage organizations doesn't move the women's movement ahead, and little is accomplished between 1869 and 1878, as evidenced by the Supreme Court decision in 1874 that said citizenship does not give women the right to vote, and the rejection of the Women's Suffrage Amendment introduced in Congress in 1878. It's now 1890, and the two suffrage associations realized that they're not meeting their goals individually and make peace and merge to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association, also known as NAWSA. Its membership, which was about 7,000 at the time, eventually increased to 2 million. Susan B. Anthony was the dominant figure in the newly formed organization, and 10 years later, she retires, and Carrie Chapman Catt, her protege, becomes president from 1900 to 1904, and then again in 1915. Catt, who was born in 1859, was an Iowa farm girl who came from very humble beginnings and paid her way through college by taking various jobs, including working as a dishwasher. She was a committed suffragist, women's rights speaker, and most importantly, strategist and organizer who worked on various campaigns throughout the United States beginning in 1878. As NAWSA president, she devised what was called the Winning Plan, which focused on carefully coordinated state suffrage campaigns with the drive for a constitutional amendment. And NAWSA is where Catt encountered the young woman who would end up being a thorn in her side, her suffrage rival, and Ridgefield's own radical, Alice Paul. Let's go back to Alice for a moment. And there she is in all her glory. So let's talk about Alice for a moment and why she became the most influential and consequential leaders in the movement. To begin with, Alice came from very different environment from Carrie. She was born on January 11th, 1885 in Morristown, New Jersey, into a wealthy Quaker family where her parents embraced gender equity, education for women, and working to improve society. Paul's mother was a suffragist and brought Alice with her to many suffrage meetings. Alice's education was extensive and, unlike Carrie, was financed by her family. She attended Swarthmore College, which was a Quaker school co-founded by her grandfather, and graduated with a biology degree in 1905. She attended the New York School of Philanthropy, which is now Columbia University, and received a Master's of Arts degree in sociology in 1907. She went to England to study social work, and after returning to the United States, earned a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 1910. Alice later received her law degree from the Washington College of Law from American University in 1922. And in 1927, she earned a Master's of Law degree, and finally in 1928, a doctorate in civil law from American University. I'm sorry about that. Please remove window from this screen. We don't know why that's happening, but we'll continue on. Alice first began her political activism at Swarthmore, but it was while she was studying in England that she became deeply involved in the women's movement and joined Mrs. Pankhurst's Women's Social and Political Union. It is there that she would learn the militant protest tactics, including picketing, hunger strikes, and civil disobedience, that she brought back to the United States when she returned in 1910. In 1912, Alice joined the National Women's Suffrage Association. Remember, that's Carrie's association, along with her friend, suffragist Lucy Burns, who Alice met in British police station, where both were arrested for participating in suffrage activities. Paul became the leader of NAWSA's Congressional Committee in Washington, D.C., where she organized the hugely successful 1913 women's suffrage procession. Let's see if we can find that. Oh, sorry, folks, that's not working. Here we go. Oh, okay, there it is. And you'll notice they're all in different, they're in their white garb. They march in different organizations, nurses, teachers, so forth and so on. And I'm going to talk about this photo later about Ida B. Wells Burnett and her participation in the procession. But let's go back to Alice and Carrie, because this is where her disagreement and eventual feud with Carrie and more established and older suffragists came into play. As I said, NAWSA was led by Kat, primarily focusing on methodical state-by-state campaigns to win the vote. Paul preferred to aggressively lobby Congress and President Wilson for a federal constitutional amendment. She also thought that the state-by-state strategy to pass the 19th Amendment was going much too slowly and would not be effective, and her more aggressive tactics, including marches and picketing, made more of an impact. Needless to say, this was a great affront to Kat, and who thought that Alice and her younger suffragists were trying to steal power away from NAWSA leadership, and that Alice basically didn't know her place. Kat summed up her objection to the militant tactics of younger suffragists like Paul and Burns in a letter to Burns saying, "You may think we are all a set of old fogies, and perhaps we are, but I, for one, thank heaven that I am as much an old fogey as I am. It requires a good deal more courage to work steadily and steadfastly for 40 or 50 years to gain an end than it does to do an impulsively rash thing and lose it." Oh, as you can imagine, Paul's participation in NAWSA was just not going to work out, and her differences with Kat and NAWSA led her and others to split with NAWSA and continue on with her separate congressional union, which eventually became the National Women's Party in 1916. As head of the National Women's Party, she led numerous protests and marched and organized the Silent Sentinels. And there they are at the top of your page, picketing the White House. The Silent Sentinels picketed the White House from January 1917 until June 4th, 1919, when the 19th Amendment was passed both by the House of Representatives and the Senate. During this time, many of the nearly 2,000 women who picketed, including Paul, were harassed, arrested, and unjustly treated by local and US authorities. And some, including Alice, were force-fed while in jail after participating in hunger strikes. But despite the rivalry and strategic and tactical approaches between the two suffragists and their organizations, now remember, Paul's National Women's Party only had 50,000 members and Kat's had 2 million. Their disparate campaigns to win the vote finally was successful, and in August 1920, the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote was ratified. Of course, their work did not end in 1920. Unlike many activists who left public life after the passage of the 19th Amendment, Dr. Paul went on to author the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923 and dedicated the rest of her life to its passage. It finally passed in Congress in 1972, but to her great disappointment, the amendment required 38 states to be ratified, and it fell short by 3 states, even though Congress had extended the deadline to 1982. As Alice said in 1975, the great victory was getting the vote, but it's unthinkable that we can't complete it with economic equality. However, if Alice were alive today, I think she'd be very happy to learn that thanks to the unrelenting efforts of ERA advocates for 45 years, in 2017, Nevada became the first state to pass the ERA again in 45 years, followed by Illinois in 2018 and Virginia in 2020. Now that the necessary 38 states have been ratified, Congress must eliminate the original deadline and untangle a few other technical issues before it can become law. In addition to her national ERA efforts, Alice also was an advocate for social justice around the world. She founded the World Women's Party, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, in 1938, which worked closely with the League of Nations for the inclusion of gender equity into the United Nations Charter and the establishment of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Now, as many of you know, Alice was a resident of Ridgefield from the 1940s to the 1970s, living in a cottage on Branchville Road that was originally owned by her sister Helen, who, according to Alice, bought the small cottage in 1930 from her mentor in the Christian Science Church to become a camp for Christian Science children. Helen eventually brought all the property around the cottage, and Alice became a frequent visitor, selling her getaway cottage in Vermont because it was too far from her work in the United Nations. Alice moved to Ridgefield part-time in the 1940s, staying through the mid-70s. But after having a stroke in 1974, she was sent to stay in a Ridgefield convalescent home, which was Altna Craig. Unfortunately, the last few years of her life were very difficult because of her nephew, Donald, who, under the guise of taking care of Alice, plundered her estate. She was kept isolated from friends and from the outside world. But fortunately, her plight was recognized by a few friends, and guardians from Ridgefield were appointed to look after her and her estate. In 1976, she was moved to a Quaker nursing home in Morristown, New Jersey, where she lived until her death on July 9th, 1977. Carrie Chapman Catt, like Paul, continued her activism after the passage of the 19th Amendment and oversaw the transition of NAWSA into a new organization, which she founded 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, called the League of Women Voters. Their mission, like it is today, was to educate women about the electoral process and show them how to shape policy and use their vote to advocate for women's and social justice issues. Now, before I introduce our special guest, I think it's important to note that for the past 100 years, white women like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Carrie Chapman Catt, and Alice Paul have been heralded as the women who were responsible for the eventual ratification of the 19th Amendment. But in reality, the women's suffrage movement reflected the culmination of generations worth of work by resolute suffragists of all races and backgrounds. Let's take a look. Hold on. In particular, African American women like Sojourner Truth, Frances Watkins Harper, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Mary Church Terrell made crucial contributions to the cause while battling racially discriminatory practices within the mainstream suffrage movement, including Catt's NAWSA and Paul's National Women's Party. Depending on the situation, these practices frequently condoned white supremacist ideologies to garner Southern support, sometimes presenting voting rights as an assurance that if white women were granted the right to vote, the Black vote would be diluted or canceled out. In spite of this, Black suffragists persevered and continued to fight and organize for their rights, establishing their own local, regional, and national women's clubs. And in 1896, the National Association of Colored Women was founded by Mary Church Terrell, as you see up there. Activists like Ida Wells Barnett continued to fight for social justice and suffrage. And in 1913, when Alice Paul organized Washington, D.C.'s first suffrage parade and expressed concern that white women wouldn't show up if they knew they had to march alongside Black women, saying, "As far as I can see, we must have a white procession or a Negro procession or no procession at all." Ida B. Wells ignored the instruction to walk at the back of the parade with all Black groups because the historic march was to be segregated. She ended up walking with the white Illinois delegation, and a small group of other women showed up to march, including 22 founding members of the Black sorority Delta Sigma Theta. It took quite a while, but those women were integrated 72 hours before the parade into their states, but they were originally going to be relegated to the back of the parade. These courageous acts continued until the ratification of the 19th Amendment. But even after passage of the amendment, African American women voters, particularly in the South, encountered the same disenfranchised and anti-Black violence that men did, and it wasn't really until 1965 and the passage of the Voting Rights Act that Black women and men gained the opportunity to vote in reality. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, it was a long, difficult, contentious, and controversial road to victory. But we are grateful to Alice and the brave, persistent women who fought for women's right to vote and continue to fight today for equality for all and the sanctity of our votes. Now, it is my great pleasure, I hope, to introduce our very special guest, Tina Cobell-Sturgis, who will be drawing the winning ticket for her beautiful painting, Morning Solitude. For those of you who were lucky enough to hear Tina speak at our raffle kickoff before the shutdown in March, we learned that Tina who has lived in Ridgefield for 60 years. She's married to her delightful high school sweetheart, Don, and has 3 handsome grown boys and 2 outstandingly beautiful grandchildren living in Connecticut. Family, community, exploration, and growth are the most important things to her, and these themes are reflected in her extensive body of work. Whether it be her earliest successes painting tiles on Main Street in Ridgefield and other street and cityscape, or her famous, colorful, and distinctive country, city, and streetscapes of New York City, Ridgefield, and Nantucket, or with her most recent abstract journey, as it says on her website. Tina approaches each canvas as an individual expression, anticipating your audience's desire to emotionally connect with the scene, to be amused or to find peaceful individual moment. Her choice of place, color, and activity embrace the cadence and harmony of the scene as it comes alive through paint, brush, and canvas, which absolutely can be said about her beautiful painting that she's going to show us today. So welcome, Tina, and thank you again for your unbelievable donation. And can you tell us why you wanted to donate your artwork to the League? And we'd also love to hear a little bit about your journey and approach to creating Morning Solitude.
First of all, thank you, Marilyn, for such a nice introduction. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sure can.
Okay, that was really nice. I first want to thank the League of Women Voters for asking me to be the guest artist this year. I love what the League represents, and I'm very honored. My mother instilled in me as a young woman how important it is to vote and what a privilege. This year, marking the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and the right to women's vote makes it even more special. Morning Solitude, can everyone see the painting? Was inspired by my love of the ocean. The calmness, tranquility, and solace I get when I'm by the water. I love watching the fog, the atmosphere as it envelopes you like a warm blanket. This piece, I wanted to create that place of inner peace, reflection, and quiet introspection. So that's really why I chose this piece to donate.
Thank you, Tina. I think, as you said, it's more important now with everything that's going on. The lucky winner is going to have that kind of peace, I know, every time they look at your painting. And again, we are so grateful for your generosity. I don't think we would have gotten the kind of attention or the ticket sales that we've garnered if it hadn't been for you and your commitment to this community and to voting rights. And we're thrilled and honored that you chose us as an organization that you wanted to donate your great talent and work to. So thanks again. So now we're going to go right on to the main event, which is the drawing of Amanda Cordano. You're over there, and we can't thank Amanda enough for everything she's done to make this this drawing and this raffle a great success. So Amanda, stick your head in there and wave to everybody. Thank you so much for everything you've done for us in the league.
This is so exciting. This is so exciting. I did just want to thank Fairfield County Insurance Bank and Touch of Sedona for letting us post, hang the Morning Solitude in their windows. That was really lovely. It cheered up Main Street immensely. And we usually treat our guest artist to dinner and drinks at the guest bartender night at Gallo.
Oh.
This year, we don't get to do that, but we can provide you with a little gift certificate that you can do on your own.
Thank you so much.
We will be
That's
sharing
so
that.
nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina.
Yeah, and Marilyn and the whole league. Thank you.
And now,
Drum roll.
I wish I
You
had
ready?
a drum
I'm
roll.
so excited. Can't wait.
There are over 650 ticket stubs in here. Let's see who the lucky winner is.
Okay, good luck, everybody. I'm gonna mix it up really well first, okay? I want you to see that. Can everyone see?
I think so.
I'm really mixing it up.
You're doing a great job, Tina.
Okay, I'm gonna pick it. Who's it gonna be? Oh God, I'm so nervous. I hope it's great. I'm having a hard time getting one. Okay, I've got it.
Okay, here we go.
The winner is Ann Noller. Ann Noller. I don't know if she's.
Oh, yay! We're all sad we didn't win, but we're delighted for you.
Is she with us this morning?
I don't know.
Well, we will be reaching out to Anne and figuring out how and when she will receive this beautiful painting. It's ticket number something.
It's 71.
Ooh, she was an early getter.
Oh, there you go.
All right.
Okay.
That's exciting. I know
Yay, yay, so exciting.
Amanda will, I know, be in touch with her to let her know how she can get the painting. And we really do want to, we can't thank you enough, Tina, for your generosity. And we want to thank everyone who participated in the raffle. I think we sold over 600 tickets. Is that right, Amanda? Does that sound right?
That is correct.
That's been our grandest raffle ever. And we can assure you that we will put it to good use, giving educational programs to the folks in Ridgefield. So thank you again. And before we go, I'd like to mention the League's upcoming events, all co-sponsored and hosted by the library on Zoom. They are on February 9th, a Get to Know Your Town talk at 11 a.m. with First Selectman Rudy Marconi. On March 4th, a Women's History program at 7 p.m. with author and humorist Dr. Gina Barreca, who is really fantastic, and trust me, you'll love it. And our annual Meet Your Legislators meeting on March 20th at 10 a.m. with state legislators Amy Berger-Giavallo, Ken Gucker, and Will Haskell. Again, all of these programs are co-sponsored by the library, and soon they will be up on the library's website for you to register. So I encourage everyone to go to the Keeler Tavern Museum and Historical Center's website and check out all of their fantastic events there so that you can register and support all they do for our community. Now what we're going to do, if we have any questions, you can put them in the chat for either me about the suffrage movement, which I may or may not be able to answer, but can get you an answer, or for Tina about her process concerning her painting. We'd be happy to entertain those.
So thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Tina and Amanda. So far, only compliments. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you so much for a wonderful program. If you have a question, put it in your chat, please. And maybe I could also remind you of, we have today one of our tavern tastings program coming up at 6:30 p.m. It is free program. Go to our website, calendar of events. And along the women's votes and women's suffrage, Joel Third is going to start a two-part series on Zoom where he will use his wonderful Career and Eyes collection to speak to women's rights. So that is also the first event is on January we just put it out, January the 26th. And then the second part is going to be in February. So
You know, and it's interesting, Hildy, when we were talking before with Tina, we had talked about the fact of how important art was during the suffrage movement, because remember, they didn't have any way of communicating, you know, via Zoom, that's for sure. And so they handed out cartoons and handbills during all their speeches and the like, and they were all done by artists who actually some of whom became quite famous after that. So again, art and the suffrage movement and women's rights all have married together, and people sort of wonder, why do we work with the Ridgefield Guild of Artists? Well, Tina eloquently explained why her painting was so important during this time and how it worked with the suffrage movement. So although sometimes you think, how do all these organizations work together? The League works with the Keeler Tavern to talk about the importance of history and how that impacted everyone through the women's movement, through the race relations movement. We work with the library, who does an extraordinary job educating people about all these things. We're very blessed to have such extraordinary partners. So again, Hildy, we'd like to thank you for participating and in this event today. We'd like to thank, hi Brenda, there's Brenda, raise your hand, Brenda, from the library for being a co-sponsor for so many of the League's activities. Working all together, we can make this a better community and a better world. We're delighted again to be part of this community and hope you'll all join the League of Women Voters. You can go right to our website, Ridgefield League of RLWV.org, and you can learn more about the League or join us. You can go to Hildy's website, the library's website. There's all kinds of information available, and we welcome you all. That's it for me, Hildy. Anything else on your part?
No, I think so. This was wonderful. We love collaborating with you guys next year back in the Garden House. So, you know, put the date. It's always going to be January the 12th, right? On your calendar, 2022.
Yep. So we always have so much fun at Keeler, and there's food. You know?
And
so
drink.
next year we hope to see you all in person, but continue to join us on Zoom. Both the Keeler Tavern has wonderful programs. As I said, we have our 3 upcoming programs, and the Ridgefield Library has done such an extraordinary service to this community during these really difficult times. And I'd like to give them a hand as well. And thank you all, Brenda, and everyone for participating today. We wish you good health. We wish you safety. Be safe and join every organization you can that promotes voting, and your library and Keeler and all the other organizations in town. The Ridgefield Guild of Artists is always open for you to virtually to participate in whatever they can. So thank you again, and we wish you a good afternoon.